welcome to another episode of Project Build. This episode we're going to be looking at doing the front subframe bushings from an Audi B6, B7, A4, S4. And I'll take you through kind of the tools that are needed, go over the bushing types, and then the whole process as well. So let's look into the bushing first and see what we got going on there. Here are the subframe bushings. I've got them all removed. I'm jumping ahead a bit here, but anyways, I just wanted to show you the differences that I noted. So these were they're all upside down relative to how they're installed in the car. These came from the rear of the subframe, and you can see they're kind of castellated. And this one's pretty deformed and squished, whereas the front ones are solid. So these are considered sport subframe bushings, and these are considered non-sport. Sport ones also have these little stiffeners that go into them, and they only go on the one side. This is left open for whatever reason. Anyways, you can remove those however you want, and I don't know how guys do it without the tool. I don't know if they drill, saw, collapse, punch it through, set it on fire, whatever it is. I'm not sure how they do it, but I'll show you how to do it with the tool. And so this is the new stuff I've got. I went with two different brands. These two are from Vico, these two are from Reen, just to see what the differences are. They're nearly identical. This one has a part number on it relative to this part number over here, whereas this one doesn't. Yeah, build quality looks nearly identical. And we'll see how they go. So one thing I did notice is that these little stiffeners are removable, and these bushings did not come with them. So what I'll do is transfer these over, and then because I only have two, and technically now I have 8 slots open, or 6 remaining, I'm gonna go find 3 cars from the junkyard and just pop these all out and fill these all in. And it's gonna kind of act as a the ECS rear diff subframe bushing stiffeners, where they've got the aluminum inserts that fill the voids and just help stiffen it up a bit, but not going to the extent of like an aluminum bushing. So yeah, that's pretty much. I'll get to finally pitch these things. So for the tools, I've acquired the OEM removal tool and installation tool. This is part number 3372, and I think this is 3372-2, and then -1. It all came as a kit. I found it on eBay used. I think it's like 80 bucks. I'm sure I'll get plenty of use out of it. So this isn't everything that you need. You still have to kind of fabricate some stuff. What you'll need as well is some threaded rod, 2 washers, and 2 nuts. I got this from, Canadian Tire, Home Depot, wherever, and it is just 5/8 threaded rod with a nut that I welded onto the top of it to act as kind of a really long bolt. It has to go through all of this and all of that as well. So you want something that's at least 10 inches long, and you're not going to be able to use, I think this was 3/4 inch. Yeah, 3/4 inch was just too big to jam into there. So if you're looking for something 5/8 is the one to use, that's still not it. So I also happen to have wheel bearing puller kit for pressed in bearings on the B6s, B6 A4s, and the B5 A4s. I'm able to use this guy here that acts as a nice plate. I thought I was going to be able to use this bolt, but it's obviously way too big. I think it's like an M22, so that didn't work. So I think that was the only piece I'm going to be that's the only piece I'm using. So if you happen to have a big plate, it needs to be fairly sturdy and stout. That's going to be your ticket. And I guess, yeah, we'll get into the process of how to remove it. Now when you're doing this, you want to make sure you have this window pointed this way, only because the overall subframe is stronger towards the back. It also has this cutout here, so you want to make sure that all your force is being applied on the strong side versus here, and it can slip off. So you want to make sure it's well supported before you start drawing down on this. Try to make sure this is centered, and yeah, just start giving her the beans. And there you have it. And there you go. One subframe bushing removed. 2 more to go. I didn't think the impact would have had the jam to drive one of these things out, but it definitely does, and I'd prefer not to use it just because it, you know, when you've got the threaded tool that you're using, I like to not shock this with the impact too often. I'd rather try to make this thing as reusable as possible for as long as I can, so I'll usually defer to the manual way and put a little effort into it. So there you go, last one out. Subframe ready to go to the powder coating, and then I'll show you how to pop one of these in. Anyways, hopefully reinstall in a moment. Alright, so the subframe came back from powder coating and it looks pretty good. I've already got the my transmission mounts bolted up, but anyways, finish came out real nice, looks brand new. I did weld the seam here and on the back side here, or actually this is the underside and that would be the front of it. But yeah, anyways, anytime I could get some weld time in, I take advantage of. And this was also kind of something that I've read where guys say could cause some creaks. So this thing wasn't creaking before, but I thought I'd take advantage of having it out and getting some hours in with the welder. Other than that, I've already got one installed. We'll start looking at what needs to happen with that, and starting on this side. So something you're going to want to do before is lube up the inner bore with your favorite kind of lube, also with this outer edge as well. And then you're also going to want to take note of the orientation that this slot is in. You want to make sure it's going from side to side on your subframe, and Audi indicates that there's a 5-degree variance that you're allowed, plus or minus. So what you want to do is try to line this up with the other side to be parallel. It's a little tricky because this one part here cups the top of it, and as you're driving this in, you can't really see where that orientation is. So what I do is I line this slot up to be parallel with the slot that you can see from the top side in there, and that kind of gives you a visual reference of how straight or perpendicular this is. So, and then all I do is take a level and go from one end to the other to kind of verify if it's within that 5 degrees. I mean, it's not too scientific, but it's you know, close enough for my application. And yeah, so once you have this little cup loaded on, that's kind of the first step. And then you're going to want to take your little half moons, half rings here, and you want to make sure the tapered side is pointing up. And it doesn't matter where they land, I like to make sure that the seam is kind of covered, and you're going to want to make sure that this ridge is on the bottom. When I did the removal, I had this essentially upside down like this, and you can definitely do it in this manner as well when you're doing the removal. Doesn't matter which way you have it, but for the installation you want to make sure you have this ridge down, that way these guys don't slide out or pop out. So we'll get these in. You're gonna load up this guy, and you're gonna want to make sure your plate doesn't interfere with anything on the bottom. You want to make sure it stays centered, and you could use a bar of steel for this. I tried it upside down like this, and it pushed it off center because it was interfering with something. So you want to make sure whatever you're using stays centered to the hole. And there it is, one installed, 2 more to go. Now, if I had a bit of a longer threaded rod, maybe 12 inches, then I wouldn't have to do it in 3 steps. I've got to kind of draw it down just a bit because I can't fit this in, which would give me just a quick 2 steps. But instead I've got this intermediate step where I've got to draw it down a couple more millimeters, and then I can finally get the nut to catch the rod here. So anyway, something to think about is definitely get a 12 mil or 12 inch threaded rod for this. I just got the last bushing in and it was a mud, and I'll tell you why. This one specifically, I don't know why. Anyways, so you have your little tapered collar that goes in, and as your bushing's going in, it's being compressed to be able to align with the bore of your subframe. And what was happening, and I don't know why, maybe it's because the bore of this, the powder coating was too thick, making the bore smaller than the rest. I've heard there's tolerance issues with these when you're trying to install aluminum bushings. Anyways, maybe that's the issue here. Regardless, what was happening was the mushroomed area, this little area that you're trying to compress with your tapered end, would end up underneath this, and it would pop this up. And when it pops it up, you know, that ends up still above here and it's not going in. So you have to work. I did it at least a dozen times, and what I ended up doing was removing this from the entire equation. I grabbed my other piece, wherever it was, zip tied these two together, put them on, and then I threw another zip tie around the back edge of this, kind of coming in and around like that, and then drove it in that way as I held it down. And that was the only way to do it. My threaded rod took quite the beating. I had to tap it a couple times just to keep it moving freely. Anyways, so that's over. That only happened on one of them. The rest of the 3 of them went great. Now all I have to do is pop this thing back into the chassis. And one of the common questions that guys ask is, are the bolts reusable? The factory service manual says a lot of things. It says that these are not. It says that they're torque to yield. I've reused them successfully multiple times on front and rear subframes. I torque them to 90 foot-pounds and I've never had an issue since. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get this finally off my workbench. I hope this video helps somebody out there, and good luck with your subframe and bushing replacement. Thanks.